If you and me were ever talking and you said Samurai Champloo is your favorite show, the thing is I'd automatically know you are cooler than me. Clearly, you are the better man or woman, the bigger person. You have ascended and we are all living in your world. Like, sorry for even thinking of existing, bruh. The show is just cool and there is no better way to put it. Now you might be thinking, it must be the plot. But not really. Unlike many celebrated series, Samurai Champloo isn't driven by a massive central conflict. Most episodes could almost stand alone. So it must be the momentum. But how wrong you'd be to assume that. Because it really doesn't feel like every episode is pushing towards an inevitable climax. There are little to no stakes. Failure in the series would not bring the world to a stop. The world building? Not really, it's more of a backdrop than a puzzle waiting to be solved. Now at this point, you're probably about to go deep into research on the lore of Samurai Champloo. My advice? Stop right there. You're looking for a needle in the haystack with a blindfold on, and even worse, the needle is not in the haystack. Samurai Champloo has no extensive lore with hidden mysteries. There's no massive character development, no memorable big bad antagonist, no real escalation, no impactful cliffhangers, no clear answers, no big spectacles that will overwhelm you. In a nutshell, what I'm saying is, if you judge Samurai Champloo by the standards we use to measure all great stories, it comes up surprisingly short. By almost every conventional metric, it should feel forgettable, and yet, it isn't. Somehow, despite stripping away so many of the ingredients we associate with greatness, Samurai Champloo has a style, an atmosphere, a form of emotional resonance, and a presence that has kept it beloved for decades. So now you're asking, what did Samurai Champloo have that made it special then? Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if this is you, you are asking the wrong question. The question here is not why, but why not? The real question is, why does the absence of all these vital ingredients not spoil the dish? Or maybe, just maybe, the things we think make stories unforgettable aren't actually the things that do. Let's focus on the word Champloo. It means mix or scramble, and this is the best way to describe the series. The man responsible for this remix goes by the name Shinichirō Watanabe. I hope I've said that right. He set Samurai Champloo in a distorted, misplaced version of Japan's Edo period. For my nerds out there, that's between 1603 to 1867. And if history really isn't your thing, just know in this period, you couldn't provide identity scientifically. If someone claimed to be you, well, good luck. If you needed surgery, just know you're doing it awake, and entertainment was literally conversation. No Netflix, no YouTube, no Spotify. Watanabe somehow managed to blend this historical backdrop with hip-hop culture, thus the name Champloo. Here's the plot. 3 unlikely strangers wander across Edo, Japan, searching for a samurai who smells of sunflowers. Simple enough. But underneath that simple journey are 2 forces constantly pulling at the story. One is the Edo period, and the other is hip-hop. At first, those two seem completely unrelated, but hip-hop has always been built on one idea, and that's sampling. Taking an old record, breaking it apart, and turning it into something that feels completely new. That's exactly what Samurai Champloo does. It doesn't simply borrow history, it samples it. Now, before we even get to the Edo period, Japan had spent almost 100 years tearing itself apart in one of the bloodiest civil wars in its history. Then, everything changed. The Tokugawa shogunate seized power, unified the country, and kicked off the Edo period, over 250 years of peace. Now, if you ask me, peace sounds amazing, and I'm all for it, unless your entire identity is built around war. The samurai suddenly had no wars left to fight. Battlefield legends became government clerks. Military commanders became tax collectors. Thousands lost their lords through political reforms, becoming ronin, who are basically masterless samurai with nowhere to belong. And to make it worse, the shogunate didn't stop there. To keep that peace, it locked society into a rigid hereditary caste system. Samurai ruled farmers fed the country, artisans built it, and merchants, they sat at the very bottom, looked down upon because they created wealth instead of tangible goods. Ironically, peace completely flipped this system upside down. Trade exploded. The merchants everyone mocked became rich. Meanwhile, countless lower-ranking samurai struggled to survive. This wealth boom gave birth to the ukiyo, also known as the floating world, which are basically licensed entertainment districts overflowing with tea houses, gambling, theater, prostitution, fashion, and nightlife. Officially, the samurai ruled Japan. Unofficially, culture did. The shogunate also shut Japan off from almost the entire world. Foreigners were banned and Japanese citizens could not leave. If they did, the punishment was death. Only one tiny, heavily monitored island, known as Dejima, was allowed to trade with the outside world. Meanwhile, the independent Ryukyu kingdom was secretly conquered and used as a backdoor trading route. Its people were treated as outsiders in a country they increasingly served. Then, there was Christianity. Terrified that foreign influence would undermine their rule, the shogunate hunted Christians relentlessly. Forcing entire communities underground. Firearms were tightly controlled, rebellions were crushed, and suddenly, the search for a samurai who smells of sunflowers doesn't sound so random anymore. It leads straight into hidden Christian communities, government persecution, foreign smuggling, and some of the darkest corners of Edo, Japan. So where does hip-hop come into all of this? You see, hip-hop was born in the Bronx during the 1970s, where Black and Latino communities faced poverty, violence, and systemic neglect. They didn't have political power, so they built cultural power. This sounds familiar because Edo's lower class did something remarkably similar. Unable to challenge the system with weapons, they challenged it with culture. Wood brick prints, street theaters, fashion, art that mocked authority without openly confronting it. Hip-hop is traditionally built on 4 pillars, and Samurai Champloo remixes every one of them. MCing is about giving a voice to people history forgot. That's exactly what the series does with ronin, criminals, servants, prostitutes, drifters, and outcasts. Graffiti is about leaving your mark on a world that refuses to see you. Episode 18 turns woodblock printing into Edo's version of a graffiti war. B-boying, which is basically breakdancing, transformed conflict into creativity, replacing rigid rules with rhythm, improvisation, and self-expression. And finally, there is DJing. A DJ samples old records and rearranges them into something completely new. That's Shinichirō Watanabe's entire creative philosophy. He takes the old record of Edo, Japan, ronin, hidden Christians, the Ryukyu kingdom, tea houses, isolationism, and scratches it into sneakers, baseball, beatboxing, graffiti, and hip-hop. The results shouldn't work, but somehow it becomes one of the coolest worlds anime and even television has ever created. So there you have it, the Edo period and hip-hop and their underlying meanings. When the shogunate locked down Japan and stripped the lower class of their power, the streets didn't give up, they made art. History has a funny habit of repeating itself. Whenever people lose the power to change society with weapons, they change it with culture. Just like the youth of the 1970s Bronx, the outcasts of Edo created an underground counterculture of graffiti, dance, and rebellion. Culture built this world. History gave it bones. Hip-hop gave it rhythm. But culture alone doesn't make a world believable. Every great fictional world is governed by rules. Rule number 1, history serves style, not accuracy. Rule number 2, power always protects itself. Rule number 3, survival is stronger than honor. And finally, rule number 4, culture outlives oppression. But the rules don't matter unless they shape the people forced to live under them. Samurai Champloo gives us 3 people from completely different walks of life, each carrying a different piece of Edo Japan on their backs. Jin represents the dying gasp of the traditional orthodox samurai class, rigid, bound by honor, but obsolete in a world that no longer needs killers. Mugen hails from the Ryukyu Islands. His wild, erratic fighting style reflects someone completely detached from mainland Japanese discipline. The discrimination Mugen faces throughout the series mirrors the actual historic xenophobia and ethnic anxiety mainland Japanese held towards Ryukyuan outcasts. Fu operates in a vulnerable working-class space of tea houses and entertainment districts. The show constantly focuses on the underbelly of Edo: gambling dens, counterfeiters, sex workers, and corrupt low-level magistrates, rather than the grand palaces. They mirror the world perfectly. Jin represents tradition, Mugen represents change, and Fu represents humanity. Now every great world asks the same question: what happens to the people it leaves behind? Jin is the answer to that question. He isn't just a samurai. You see, he's the ghost trying to survive in a world that has already moved on. Jin's story begins at a prestigious dojo, where he is recognized as a prodigy, mastering a legendary sword style under his teacher Enshiro. And everything seems to be going exactly the way a samurai's life is supposed to go, until the shogunate come knocking. They offer Enshiro a deal: turn the dojo into a training ground for government assassins. Enshiro accepts, but Jin doesn't. To him, it's not just a bad decision, it's the complete corruption of everything their swordsmanship was supposed to stand for. So one night, Enshiro quietly enters Jin's room to eliminate his own student before that defiance can spread. Acting on instinct, Jin draws fast and kills the man who taught him everything. And this is where I think Watanabe makes Jin so interesting. Because most samurai stories ask a simple question: how loyal are you to your master? Jin asks something much messier: what happens when your master is the one who is wrong? We love to romanticize samurai as warriors guided by honor, but back then, honor wasn't always what came first. Loyalty did. Your master, your lord, your institution. Jin throws all that away in one swing of his sword, not because he stops believing in honor, but because his idea of honor is bigger than the institution asking him to betray it. And by sunrise, everything has changed. The prodigy is now a murderer. The dojo he once called home brands him a traitor, and overnight Jin becomes what every samurai fears the most: a ronin. Which is almost cruel when you think about the timing, because Jin spent his entire life becoming the perfect warrior. Right at the moment, history decides it no longer needs warriors. That's the tragedy behind Jin. His sword is flawless, but the world around him isn't. So Jin leaves. No master, no home, no destination. Just a sword in a world that's already moved on without him. And honestly, what exactly is someone like Jin supposed to do now? I mean, he spent his entire life perfecting one craft, but the problem is, peace has made that craft almost meaningless. For months, Jin wanders across Edo, Japan with no real destination. Not because he's searching for something, but because he has absolutely nothing left to search for. Until one afternoon he walks into a small tea house. And at this point, Jin is basically a ghost. He doesn't have a future. He is simply surviving long enough to reach the next day. The funny thing is, he has absolutely no idea that the two people waiting inside this tea house are about to completely ruin that lonely little existence. So let's go back to the story. Mugen's story begins hundreds of miles away from mainland Japan on the Ryukyu Islands. Not exactly the kind of place where legends are supposed to come from. At the time, the islands sat on the edge of Japanese society, treated as outsiders by the mainland, and for many, a place to dump the people nobody else wanted: criminals, exiles, and the forgotten. That's exactly where Mugen grows up. No family, no master, and no school teaching him the proper way to swing a sword. Just straight out violence. And the simple question of whether he'd survive long enough to see tomorrow. So he learns the only way he can, by watching anyone ruthless enough to stay alive. Which explains something that always fascinated me about Mugen's fighting style. It looks messy, completely improvised, and almost accidental. But that's exactly why it works. Predictability in his world gets you killed, especially when your opponent already knows the rules and you don't. Chaos wasn't Mugen's personality, it was literally his education. As he grows older, Mugen joins a pirate crew alongside the only people he's ever really been able to call family. Together, they raid government ships, steal what they can, and survive however they have to. Until one job goes horribly wrong. He was betrayed, captured, and forced to throw himself into the ocean, after which everyone assumed he drowned and died. And honestly, I think this moment explains Mugen far more than any sword fight ever could. We spend a lot of time talking about how angry Mugen is, how reckless he is, how impossible he is to control. But imagine the lesson life has just taught him. The only people he ever trusted are the people who left him to die. After something like that, trusting people doesn't feel brave. It feels absolutely stupid. So when Mugen eventually crawls back into the world, he makes himself a promise. Nobody will ever own him again. And suddenly, his hatred of authority starts to make a lot more sense. It's never about the magistrates, or samurai, or government officials. They just happen to represent the same thing. Someone trying to tell him where to stand, how to fight, or how to live. Mugen would rather die than hand that freedom over again. Years later, broke, starving, and looking for his next meal, Mugen wanders into a tiny tea house. Inside, a magistrate's son is making life miserable for one very unfortunate waitress. She offers Mugen a free meal if he'll help. To him, that's the easiest job he's ever accepted. And a few seconds later, the magistrate's men are scattered across the floor. The magistrate's son is lucky to be alive, and Mugen has already become bored. So he asks the room a question. Is there anyone stronger? And that's when the door opens. A quiet Ronin walks in. Mugen doesn't ask who he is. He doesn't ask why he's there. He doesn't even try to introduce himself. He attacks. Because for someone like Mugen, the quickest way to understand another person is to cross swords with them. Now let's get back to the story again. Who brought these two together and why? The funny thing is, neither Jin nor Mugen are actually the reason this story happens. These two idiots spend the entire series thinking they're the main characters, not knowing they are both supporting characters in someone else's journey. And that someone else is Fu. Her story begins with a man we've actually been talking about the entire video. Kasumi Seizo, the samurai who smells of sunflowers. He is a high-ranking samurai who was forced into hiding after his involvement in a failed Christian rebellion. To protect his family from the shogunate, Seizo disappears, walking off through a field of sunflowers, which sounds noble when you think about it, until you remember who's left behind. Fu and her mother are left to survive in poverty, and years later, her mother falls terminally ill and dies. But before she dies, she gives Fu one final request: find your father. That's it. No map, no address, just a strange clue that somewhere in Japan, there's a samurai who smells of sunflowers. And armed with an impossible amount of optimism, Fu sets off across Japan, which eventually leads her to a tiny tea house. Unfortunately, it's also the exact tea house where two homicidal idiots decide today is a great day to meet each other. And by the time the vagabond and the quiet Ronin wake up in prison, Fu has lost everything. Her job is gone, her money is gone, and the only two people capable of surviving the roads ahead are about to be executed. So she makes the craziest decision in the entire series. The following morning, as both swordsmen are being led to their execution, Fu smuggles a cache of fireworks into the town square and detonates them, throwing the entire town into chaos. The guards scatter, the execution collapses, the magistrate falls, and suddenly, two men who should be dead are standing right in front of her. Naturally, they immediately try to kill each other again, and knowing she can't stop them by force, Fu does the one thing neither of them expects. She makes it about death. She reminds them that without her, they'd both be corpses. Then she leaves their future to a coin toss. Heads, and they become her bodyguards until she finds the samurai who smells of sunflowers. Tails? Well, there really wouldn't be a show. The coin lands in her favor, and honestly, if you ask me, I think people massively underestimate Fu. Because when people think about Samurai Champloo, they remember the swords, Jin's discipline, and Mugen's chaos, but take Fu completely out of the equation. Forgetting that without her, none of this happened. Jin and Mugen do not become friends, leave alone surviving episode 1. What's really fascinating is that Fu is the only member of the trio with almost no power. She isn't the fastest, the strongest, or the best fighter. Basically, she shouldn't be the one calling the shots. And yet, somehow, she does. Take a moment to think about what she actually accomplishes here. She doesn't overpower two master swordsmen. She does not manipulate them. She doesn't even threaten them. She simply reminds them one thing: you'd both be dead without me. It's such a small moment, but it tells you everything you need to know about Fu. She understands something neither Jin nor Mugen do. People don't always move because they're forced to. Sometimes, they move because someone gives them a reason to. The funny thing is, Fu thinks she is searching for her father, but I don't think that's what she's really looking for. She's searching for the one thing she lost years ago, which is a place to belong. She just doesn't know it yet. In the end, the trio finally reaches the samurai who smells of sunflowers, Kasumi Seizo. Not a legendary warrior and not a mythical swordsman, just an old, tired man. And for one brief moment, it feels like the journey was worth it. Except, the shogunate never lost Fu. They let her wander. Every village, every checkpoint, every mile she walked, she unknowingly led them straight to Seizo. Carrier Kagetoki arrives, and before Fu can truly reunite with the father she'd spent the entire series searching for, she watches him die. It's a cruel ending, because Fu discovers she'd never really been chasing her father. She'd been chasing a past that was already gone. At the same time, Jin finally confronts the same man, Carrier Kagetoki. He is the top assassin of the shogunate, and even worse, the man whose manipulation once corrupted his dojo and destroyed the life he'd once known. Earlier, I said that Jin's sword fighting was flawless and that the world around him wasn't. Against Carrier, he finally accepts that, abandoning perfection for survival. Somewhere between a reckless vagabond and an impossibly stubborn waitress, Jin finally finds something worth living for. Meanwhile, Mugen faces 3 bounty hunters whose lives he had ruined years earlier. Like him, they were abandoned by the very world that created them, and the catalyst? None other than Mugen. The man who once trusted nobody ends up risking everything for the people who are not bound to him by blood, but by choice. And that's what I love about this ending. Jin couldn't see a future. Mugen could not trust anyone. Fu could not let go of her past. 3 completely different wounds, quietly healed by the same journey. But together they found something none of them expected: a place to belong. After recovering from their wounds, the 3 reach a literal crossroads. Literally. And there are no dramatic speeches, no emotional goodbyes. They simply smile and walk away. Only then does Fu reveal the truth. The coin she flipped all the way back in episode 1 had actually landed the other way. Their entire journey had happened because she lied. But somehow, nobody cares. Because somewhere along the road, the destination stopped mattering. And maybe that's why Samurai Champloo has stayed with people for over 20 years. Not because of its plot, not because of its villains, not because of its lore, but because, like life itself, it understands that the most meaningful journeys don't end when you reach the destination. They end when you've become someone who no longer needs it. And maybe that's why Samurai Champloo feels so special. Not because it tries to impress you, but because it never has to. And that idea reminds me of today's scripture. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed, behold, the new has come. Give your boy a like and a sub, and until next time, stay safe.